Okay, shall I start? Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mohammed, for this nice introduction. Even though it's 5 minutes ago, but thank you very much. I will talk about climate change in the Arab region, impacts of climate change on utilities in this area, and what utilities can do in order to adapt to that climate change. And at the end, I will also give you some figures about the work of KfW and other partners in adaptation to climate change. KfW, some of you I think don't really know it because we are not active in Oman. It's a German development bank. Climate in the Arab world. To be frank, the extreme climate, extreme weather events are nothing new for the Arab countries. When you take a look at the old archaeological sites, you always see that even thousands of years ago, communities knew how to store water because the climate was extreme even 1,000 years ago. So many countries in this part of the world know how to adapt to extremely dry climate. Most countries are located in hyper-arid, arid or semi-arid areas. There are only some few spots in the Arab world located close to the Mediterranean Sea where the climate is not as dry. There's high water scarcity. This is nothing new for you. There are droughts, desertification in many areas, and the population growth puts even more stress to this water scarcity. Now we have climate change, which comes on top of this already not easy situation. So the temperatures are increasing. This is almost certain. The sea level will rise. This is also very certain. Which is a little more uncertain is the changes in precipitation and the intensity of precipitation. We can say in general that precipitation will become less in total, but more intense. But it's not easy to say one sentence about the whole Arab region. Climate variability will probably increase. Climate variability, this means weather extremes like extreme droughts or extreme flooding events. It's important to keep in mind, though, that climate and climate change differ among the Arab region since it's a very huge region. It's not just one country, it's very big. And climate projections always have some uncertainty. So it's not sure to say that in 20 years it will be completely dry or it will get wetter. So you have to keep this in mind. But all the decisions involve some kind of uncertainty, as you know. Okay. I think most of you are aware of this, but to differentiate between mitigation and adaptation, we have climate change. What can we do about it? We can mitigate climate change. We do this through the reduction of greenhouse gases like methane and carbon dioxide. This has been started in the 1990s or even earlier in order to reduce climate change. This can be done by energy efficiency or by alternative energy sources like wind or solar panels. By the way, KfW is also active in this climate mitigation, also in the Arab region. For example, there is a wind park in Egypt which is financed by KfW. But I will not talk about mitigation, I will talk about adaptation to climate change. Because even though we limit the greenhouse gas emission, even if we would cut it down extremely today, we would still see a changing climate because this is a long-term effect. So the other reaction to climate change is to cope with it or to adapt to that climate change. But how can we do this? Okay, I have here two impact chains for utilities in the Arab world, which are a little simplified, but I want to give you an idea what are the impacts of climate change on utilities and how you can react. We have a rising sea level. This leads to more frequent floods and to higher floods, which in turn leads to infrastructure damage. A colleague, Dr. Al-Jabri, will later talk about this in a case study. This, of course, if the springs are flooded, it has an impact on the water quantity and as well on the water quality. Seawater might enter into the water pipes, which deteriorates the quality of the water. In addition, saltwater intrusion into coastal aquifers. So when the sea level is rising, there's more pressure on the coastal aquifers, so that salty water might come into the aquifers. This is in the Arab region only the case in Gaza, as I think. Yeah. Most cities, even if they are coastal cities, get their water from inside of the land. So this is does not happen many times here. This leads to an increase of salinity, and again the water quality decreases even more. Now, what can we do about it? Against the floodings, we can install coastal infrastructure, coastal protection, or we can improve the land use planning. This means if you want to do a new, let's say, wastewater treatment plant or a new desalination facility, don't plan to build it near the coast. So the effect will be lower of the climate change on your decisions. We can treat more the water in order to get it right. Desalination or the use of alternative water resources is one solution, so the water quality is not as threatened as it would be without it. A second brief value chain, impact chain, is higher temperatures. Higher temperatures lead to, of course, in the first term, increasing water demand, because the people need more water to water their plants, their gardens. Agriculture needs more water as well, so there will be less water left at the end because of climate change. In addition, evaporation will increase and transpiration will increase, so less raw water will be available for the utilities in order to provide it to the customers, and we have even less water available. In some areas there is melting of ice and snow. I have in mind Damascus, where the Fiji Springs depends to a large scale from melting ice and snow. So since the snow acts as a natural water storage function, this will be lost, and the changes in water availability will increase over the whole year. So we have less water available, at least in some periods of the year, because it is not anymore stored in ice and released on time. A water quality issue with higher temperatures is proliferation of algae, because, as you know, higher temperatures are a better environment for algae, which we do not want to have in our raw water. The raw water will deteriorate and the water quality is threatened again. What can we do about it? Basically the same things we did without climate change. We can improve the situation of water quantity with water loss reduction. It's a possibility to do awareness campaigns, to reuse water, to store water, because it's not stored anymore in ice and snow, so we can artificially store water, and additional treatment is also one solution. To be frank, however, all these solutions are nothing new. It's not a new invention of climate change adaptation, but the practices were done before. So you might think that, in fact, the adaptation activities are business as usual, just the same like before, but with a new label on it. Everything we called water management before, now we call suddenly adaptation. This is, for KfW at least, it's not true. Of course, we still finance normal projects about water efficiency, like water loss reduction projects or water treatment projects. But if we call it adaptation, we are very keen to have precise methodology behind it. We need, in the first term, solid information on the climate, how it is and how it will develop in the future. We need impacts of climate change in the area, and how does climate change affect water quality and water quantity. It might end up in an impact chain, as you saw here, but if we do a project, it's much more detailed than this one. And we have to prove how the project really contributes to adapt the people to climate change. Okay. No, I won't skip this one. This is important for you, I think. This is the interesting part. It's about money now. Adaptation funding opportunities. If you look for funding for adaptation projects, these are the major funds available. First one is a pilot program for climate resilience. It's a fund by the World Bank. It's managed by the World Bank. The least developed countries fund is not as important for you, I guess, because only Yemen is a least developed countries, but those can get access from this fund. Special climate change fund is under the Global Environment Facility, and a new fund is the United Nations Adaptation Fund, which has the aspect of direct access. This works as follows: a country has to apply for direct access at the adaptation fund. Jordan did it, and Jordan had success, so now the institutions in Jordan just have to contact the Ministry of Planning in Jordan, which has direct access to the adaptation fund, and they do not have any more to contact multilateral organizations. And the Green Climate Fund will come into force next year, it seems, and it might be situated in Germany, but we still don't know. And this Green Climate Fund was proposed to deliver 100 billion per year for adaptation and mitigation, but to be realistic, it will be much less at the end. Okay, and let's not forget the bilateral side. From the German government, there's a special energy and climate fund, which is partly financed by the revenues from emission trading. This one is delivered by KfW and GIZ. So we are here active also with projects from this special energy and climate fund. Some figures of KfW. These are our commitments in last year, 2011, and as you see, 11% of our projects had a significant objective adaptation to climate change, and 1% had the principal objective adaptation. This means that this 1% of the total projects would not have been done without climate change. Very interesting is the sectoral allocation. As you see, water is by far the biggest sector when it comes to adaptation to climate change at KfW, because the impacts of climate change are much more strong on water in the first term than on the other sectors. Maybe agriculture is also deeply linked to the climate, but water is even more. And another slide shows you the allocation among region. Here you see that the North Africa, Middle East, the MENA countries are second in allocation, because in sub-Saharan Africa we are still doing more on climate change. Okay, let me give you two examples of our adaptation projects with particular focus on adaptation to climate change. The first one is in Jordan. I know this project because I worked in preparing it. The situation is the population is increasing, the water stress is already there, but it will get even more. But one problem is that the measurement system, the water monitoring and the climate monitoring systems are not working as good as they should be. The data is not processed, or the data is only processed manually, and then there are some failures when somebody comes with this paper sheet and gives it to the guy who has to put it into the computer. And this means at the end that the decisions on water resources management are not based on the actual climate in many cases. For example, the Water Authority of Jordan plans to build a dam somewhere, and it has to know what is the exact amount of water which it has to hold. This is extremely relevant for this kind of activities. So what KfW is financing through a grant is a technical enhancement of the existing monitoring stations, an improvement of the data processing, as well as improvement of the reporting system, so that the decision makers know about the climate and how they should react with their decisions. Another project, the second one, is in Tunisia. There is a project, it's also, I think it's half a grant and half a credit, Integrated Coastal Zone Protection Program. We have the case that the coast is already threatened by erosion, but it's accelerated by climate change, and this threatens increasingly the tourism, the infrastructure gets damaged, and the economy is at risk. So KfW comes in with a grant of 30 million euro I think it's 15 this year and possibly 15 next year, and invests it in hard measures and soft measures. The hard measures are mainly infrastructure, groins and breakwaters. I had to look it up at the dictionary what it is, to be honest. This is the kind of things you see near the coast when you have the coast here and the groins are perpendicular to the coast. These things are built against climate change in Tunisia. At the end, we have a population which is more resilient to the effects of climate change and less vulnerable. Okay. I have here some questions for discussion, even though it might come later, but I would like to address them. In order to do adaptation to climate change, we need good information on climate change. So sometimes I have the impression that the information on the climate today and on the climate of tomorrow is not available in the Arab region and in many other regions of the world. It depends on the country, of course. Some countries have better information, some have less information. Some have good information, but don't let us see them. So this is one question. And another question is if maybe we talk too much only about climate change, suddenly there are other problems like population increase, which might be even more important for Arab utilities, and water scarcity is nothing new for them. And the third one is, from my point of view, some other parts of the world, like Latin America, is much more aware of climate change funding opportunities. When you go to Peru, for example, they show you a map of vulnerability, and they say we are so vulnerable, and the industrialized countries are guilty of it because they blew all the greenhouse gases in the air. Now you have to help us you have to give us money in order to adapt to that climate change. And I see that in the Arab countries this process is only starting right now. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin, for the presentation. Our next speaker is Ms. Rania Abdul Khaliq. Rania is the Director of Environment at Ministry of Water and Irrigation in Jordan. She holds a master's degree in environmental engineering and a master's degree in water demand management with a background in civil engineering, 15 years apart, by the way. She has a different position also at the Ministry of Water, including Director of Water Demand Management, and she works also as an expert with international agencies such as UNDP. Please welcome Engineer Rania.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First of all, allow me to express my happiness to be in Oman today, and also to thank GIZ for sponsoring my participation in this conference. I will start from where Martin has stopped and put more the climate change adaptation into the local context of Jordan. Climate change impact on Jordan. Although Jordan does not contribute to more than 0.1% to the causes of global climate change, its effect on the country will be very severe. In fact, Jordan is particularly vulnerable given already scarce water resources and high levels of aridity. Natural and physical systems in Jordan are already facing heavy pressures, as you have been listening into in the morning presentations, and this will be only intensified as temperature is getting higher and precipitation will get so lower, as you know, all global models are now predicting. Jordan's second national communication, this is a mechanism in which we report to the UNFCCC about mitigation and adaptation activities in Jordan, is expecting that rising temperature will lead to a decrease in surface water runoff, and climate change is likely to affect the occurrence and severity of droughts and flash floods. This graph is from the records of the Ministry of Environment, showing total annual rainfall. This is starting 1937 and 1938. And as you show, there's a kind of a decreasing trend now in the total volumes of precipitation. And this is very important for us in Jordan because rainwater is the main water source feeding the surface and groundwater. What activities are ongoing with regard to climate change impacts in Jordan? We have ratified the UNFCCC, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1993, and the Kyoto Protocol in 2003. Submitted the initial national communication in 1998, the second national communication in 2009, and we're now in the process of preparing the third national communication. There is now a national climate change committee which was reestablished again in 2010. That includes all governmental agencies, academia, and some NGOs to discuss and coordinate climate change activities in the country. To understand more what is happening with regard to climate change, one of the major projects now we have is a UN project called Adaptation to Climate Change to sustain Jordan's Millennium Development Goals achievements. We have achieved a lot in Jordan, like 98% of the people have piped water, and the levels of services are very high, but we're now afraid that our achievements will be kind of threatened by the climate change impacts. In this project, they have studied direct and indirect impacts to climate change on the water availability and quality in one of the basins, very big basins in Jordan that is called Zarga River Basin. One major activity was studying precipitation, maximum temperature, minimum temperature, and mean temperature time series at selected climatic stations. The analysis revealed obvious decreasing trends in the precipitation time series and also increase in maximum temperature and minimum temperature. What is also becoming evident that the minimum temperature increases are more. And this is, very, very important as we were more analyzing it, because the increase in minimum temperature means more evapotranspiration, and this is quite serious for agriculture, because with more evapotranspiration, more soil moisture deficit, more irrigation quantities will be required. These are some of the results, at two of the climatic stations: precipitation, maximum temperature, and minimum temperature trends for the past 50 years. Another activity that took place at that project is going to the future, like 2100. At that time, there was no regional model for the Arab countries, so they went at downscaling activities for global climatic models. The resolution is very high, so they have to go for downscaling. And some of the results of this project was that maximum and minimum temperature revealed significant warming trends. The model predicted 1 to 4 degrees Celsius increase. This is greater in winter months, and it will be even greater after 2060. And with climate change, this was highly variable. The third activity was they went into to see, okay, temperature is increasing, so what will happen to the water resources? A hydrological model was used for the basin. The simulation was done for the past years. The two of the scenarios of climate change, A2 and B2, were applied to that model to predict the impact on climate change on the surface water runoff. And one of the outputs of the projection was that the maximum peak flow will drop from 50 cubic meters to a baseline to less than 35 cubic meters in the future scenarios. So now comes the important topic, with this happening, how can we cope with those changes? Maybe in the world we're more familiar with the mitigation, and this was getting more focus at the global level. But when you talk climate changes, you start more talking about local level. And one of the interesting definitions I got from the KFW manuals is concrete measures and technologies used are usually not new, but however, in conjunction with climate change, they're used differently and testified and embedded in an adaptation strategy. Also, like with the expected, what is coming out in international report that the Mediterranean region, Jordan, which of course is part of that region, will be impacted by a 20% decrease of precipitation. And this will impact the drinking water resources in the long term and threaten the activities of combating desertifications and the ecosystems. Jordan has developed a water strategy, and it was a long-term plan from 2008 until 2022, and it runs about several main objectives. It starts with water supply, water demand, institutional reform, water for irrigation, wastewater, and the alternative water resources as main themes for that strategy. And this strategy has now been updated to include like sentences or statements about what would be the impact of climate change. And one of the two sentences now that I took out of the strategy, that preparedness and adaptation towards upcoming, mostly unknown challenges triggered by climate change. Now it's part of the vision of that strategy. And also through the impact of climate change is generally unknown. It is assumed impacts will be probably putting more additional stress onto the water resources. And I think this was an achievement, like for me as a technical person, saying that clearly now stated in the official policy document of the government. This will give more push for adaptation activities in the country. So what kind of activities are ongoing or are envisioned now to be adaptation activities, incorporating various scenarios in water planning, including risk management responses, expanding the safe and efficient usage of non-conventional water resources in agriculture and for domestic water use, also encouraging more efficient irrigation practices and the growth of high value and less water intensive crops, and also like extra now supply projects, large infrastructure projects like the Dead Sea project and the DC project and any other small projects that encourage the use of more water harvesting techniques are kind of envisioned now to be more of adaptation or labeled, or I don't want to see labeled, but they now fall under the definition of adaptation. I'll now mention some of the best practices and some of the activities that are supported by GIZ. We have an activity, a major one called the Highland Water Forum. It's a forum in which has achieved a lot in putting all stakeholders together. You know, usually before the forum started, it was, you know, government at one side, farmers and other side, and it succeeded now that everybody now is sitting on the table and talking together. And you know, with more climate change impact, you know, the cross-sector competition will be increasing, you know, for water. You know, this forum is everybody is drawing water from the same aquifer, so imagine what would happen with even less water in that aquifer, how the cross-sectoral competition will increase. Another activity supported by GIZ is the use of marginal water or wastewater, and the interesting things about this program is that just not the use of wastewater itself, but also it works at different levels of providing guidance to farmers, networking, and also developing standards for irrigation quality and crop monitoring, and a risk management program. Maybe like loss reduction was not defined as an adaptation measure, but now we're defining it as Martin has said, like with less water resources, higher demands triggered also by climate change. You know, the extra water you get from saving the losses in the system will mean more water available. One of the interesting projects I've participated in this one was grey water recycling. Two pilots were implemented. One of them is a large hotel in which grey water was recycled in the hotel itself. Grey water is the water you get from showers and hand wash basins, and usually this water has lower pollution, so it will need rest treatment, and then it can be recycled. And imagine in a hotel like this how much water is used by tourists, and most probably big portion of this water is a grey water. This is the treatment plant that is implemented in a house that recycles grey water into the house for flushing toilets, and you can see, after treatment, the two bottles shows the difference with the qualities of the waters, the one that is coming in and coming out of the system. This is the bigger one, the pilot implemented at one of the hotels at the Dead Sea, in which also grey water is recycled now within the hotel for flushing toilets. And this hotel was a good example of which even we say that every drop of water was used 3 times. The water, first they get the fresh water, the grey water part of it is recycled, and then the whole wastewater coming out of the hotel is treated and reused in landscaping of the hotel. And one of the interesting things that when I talked to the management hotel of why they were very keen to go into this project is in addition to saving water, it will give them the green image. Now tourists coming from Europe are now checking, is your hotel a green hotel? So this was part of the way they will start saying that we are a green hotel. What also is good about this pilot, it's not implementing the pilot and coming out of just a report of how much really we have achieved of reduction of the water that was used at our hotel. It was accompanied by a series of let's say supporting activities to turn it into a program that can somehow continue into the future. Like there was continuous presentation, consultations with different, like the Ministry of Public Works were contacted, and we sat in a committee with them because Public Works is the ministry that issues the codes for the buildings, so it was a good idea to start introducing it as a voluntary activity in building codes. There was, one of the things you start, implementing these projects, you find other targets group you need to talk to. You need to train technicians of maintaining such systems,